Chapter 8 of Anastasia again. In chapter 7, Anastasia bought a goldfish for the neighbor, Gertrude Stein, or Gertrude Steen, or Gertrude Stein, however you want to call it. And her parents are arguing a little bit about doing things around the house. She spoke on the phone to Robert Giannani, and they're kind of flirting a little bit. And at the end of the chapter 7, she starts to write her novel. And then she doesn't like what she's written. But this is chapter 8. It was not easy to push the doorbell without spilling the goldfish bowl, but after a moment, Anastasia managed a good shrill ring. After another moment, she could hear Gertrude Stein shuffling footsteps, and then her voice. "Who's there?" "It's Anastasia again." The door opened and Gertrude Stein peered out. "Anastasia again? It looks like Anastasia Krupnik to me." "Ha!" The "ha" was a hiccupy sort of laugh, which was more of a laugh than her dumb joke deserved, Anastasia thought. "I bought you something, a goldfish." Gertrude Stein looked at the goldfish and the goldfish bowl for a moment. Then she nodded and invited Anastasia inside. That was a relief. Anastasia had thought that she would have to explain about the goldfish. I guess when you get old, she thought, you get over being surprised by stuff. So when someone brings you a goldfish, you don't even ask why. They put the goldfish bowl on a table in the living room next to a plastic vase of artificial flowers. Gertrude Stein leaned close to the bowl and watched intently as the fish swam in circles, flipping his tail. The little diver stood on the bottom of the bowl, tilted slightly, wearing his huge plastic helmet. Suddenly, Gertrude Stein began to laugh. Anastasia thought that was rude, to begin to laugh at a gift before you have even said thank you. "What are you going to name your goldfish?" asked Anastasia politely, pretending not to notice that Gertrude Stein was laughing. But she just laughed harder. "My goldfish is named Frank," said Anastasia. "I don't know if yours is male or female, though." Gertrude Stein looked at her, still chuckling. "It's male, of course. It's the funniest thing I have ever seen. I'll name him Mr. Stein. He looks exactly like my husband, the same Popeyes." Anastasia glanced around the room for signs of a husband. At her house, there were always pipes lying in ashtrays, or size 12 sneakers in a corner, but there was no indication of a Mr. Stein. "Where is your husband?" she asked. "Oh goodness, I haven't any idea. He's been gone for 40 years. He ran off with a lady mandolin player who wore bright blue shoes." "Well," said Anastasia uneasily, "I'm very sorry he did that." But Gertrude Stein was laughing again. "Oh, don't be. He looked like a goldfish, although I never realized it until this afternoon. I was glad when he ran off. I never should have married him." "Why did you then?" "Oh, I was a spinster. Do you know what a spinster is?" "Yeah, I think I'm going to be one because I'm so tall and everything. Boys don't like me, except one boy, and I don't like him." "Nonsense. Give yourself time. How old are you?" 12. "Well, I was over 30 and not married. Lived in the right house, the same house where I had been born. Lived here all alone because my parents were both dead by then. And along came Mr. Stein one day, selling cookware, things you cook with, door to door." "Did you buy any?" "I bought the whole batch, still have it. It even outlasted Mr. Stein." "Excuse me, but why do you call him Mr. Stein? My mother calls my father Myron." Gertrude Stein began to laugh so hard that the sofa on which they were sitting wiggled and moved. "His name was Lloyd," she sputtered. "Lloyd Stein. But I'll have to tell you what happened on our wedding night." Good grief, Anastasia liked reading about people's wedding nights in Cosmopolitan magazine or in Gothic novels, but she certainly didn't want to hear about a real person's wedding night. Gertrude Stein took a deep breath so that she would stop laughing. Then she said, "The night we were married, Mr. Stein said to me, 'Gertrude, are you familiar with the word which is spelled L-L-A-M-A?' I thought for a moment and then I said, 'Of course, llama. It's an animal with a sad, smiling sort of face.' Anastasia nodded. It was the same way she would have described a llama. Then he said, 'Gertrude, your description is correct, but your pronunciation is wrong. When a word begins with a double L, the double L is pronounced as Y. Therefore, the correct way to say llama is in fact llama. Don't you see? Very few people know that, he said. Well, I told him, I certainly never knew that. I didn't either, said Anastasia. Then he told me, so you can see, of course, that the correct pronunciation of Lloyd is actually Yoid. I would prefer that you pronounce my name correctly now that we are man and wife. Please call me Yoid from now on. Good grief, said Anastasia, beginning to wiggle. Good grief indeed. How on earth can you call someone Yoid? I wanted to hit him over his silly, pompous, pop-eyed head with one of those aluminum saucepans that he had sold me. I didn't, of course, but you can see that it was somewhat fortunate that the mandolin player came along. In 3 years, I had never called him by name. He hated laughter, and I could never have said Yoid without laughing. When I had to speak to him at all, I called him Mr. Stein. A magazine that I read a lot would call that a brief and unfortunate marriage. Yes, it certainly was a brief and unfortunate marriage. Did you ever look up llama in the dictionary to see if maybe he was right? Of course not. Of course he wasn't right. He was an idiot with goldfish eyes. Well, I'm sorry that you married him. If you can hear my cats in the background, I am sorry, but Louis is crying. Me too, but it was understandable, I guess. I was over 30 after all, and all alone. I liked his aluminium cookware, and the man I loved had married someone else. Now that was romantic and interesting. What was his name? Gertrude looked a little bit sad. Edward Evans. We had grown up together. As a matter of fact, Anastasia, Edward lived in your house when he was a boy. It was always hard to imagine old people being young. Anastasia looked for a long time at Gertrude Stein and just couldn't see even the smallest part or fragment of a young face. Sam had been right. She really did look like a witch. I don't mean to be rude or anything, Anastasia said, but you know, Gertrude Stein, you would look much nicer if you would fix your hair differently. Gertrude Stein held up her hands. They were twisted and misshapen. It's all I can do to hold a hairbrush, she explains. My arthritis is so bad. Arthritis is like a disease that you get in your bones, and it makes it hard to move things that you use your bones with, which is most of your body. So things like walking, using your hands. Well, said Anastasia, tomorrow when you take Sam for a walk, why don't you walk past the drugstore and buy some curlers, and when you come back, I'll fix your hair for you. Gertrude Stein thought about that, frowning. All right, she said finally. We'll give it a try, now that there is a new Mr. Stein in the house. In his bowl, the new Mr. Stein gazed out with bulging eyes, swished his tail, and swooped around the plastic diver. Anastasia, who was an expert on goldfish emotions, could tell he was quite happy. Mom, I have something important to tell you about. How do you like the curtains so far? One of the new curtains was hanging at one window. The others were still spread on the kitchen table beside the sewing machine. Fine. They look pretty good. Can you stop sewing for a minute? Yeah, sure. What's on your mind? Anastasia sat down on one of the kitchen chairs opposite her mother and wrapped her feet around the rungs, the bottom part of the chair. This is sort of embarrassing, she said. Promise you won't tell anyone? Okay, I promise. Well, I sort of feel weird about this. I'm sorry, but there isn't any other word except weird for it. But I think I'm going to have to marry Robert Giannani. Anastasia had always thought that this was only in books that people's mouths fell open in surprise. But her mother's mouth fell open in surprise. Anastasia, that's impossible. How could that be? You're only 12 years old. You can't possibly... Mom, Anastasia said impatiently, I didn't mean now. I mean years from now, after I finish college. But I might as well start getting used to the idea now. And that's what makes me feel weird, because I can't stand Robert Giannani. I had sort of decided that maybe I could learn to like him, because I do like him a little bit sometimes. But I was just talking to Gertrude Stein, and she was telling me how she married someone she couldn't stand, although she liked his aluminium cookware. But she never did learn to like him, because he wanted to call him Yoid, And then he ran off with a mandolin player. And hold on, hold everything. I very rarely want a beer in the middle of the afternoon, but suddenly I want a beer. Can I get you something? Are there any popsicles? Her mother came back from the refrigerator with a can of beer and a green popsicle. Anastasia peeled off the paper and began to lick the popsicle carefully. Now, for starters, why do you think you're going to have to marry Robert Giannani in 10 or 15 years? Because he loves me, and he's the only boy who ever has or ever will. Now, don't feel bad about this, Mom, because it isn't your fault, but I am a sort of freak. In 5th grade, I was the tallest girl in the class, but the boys were taller, most of them. But in 6th grade, I was the tallest person in the class. There weren't any boys as tall as me, and I was even taller than the teacher. By the time I finish high school, I will probably be one of the world's tallest humans. I also have the world's most hideous and gross hair, in case you haven't noticed. Now, for some reason, Robert Giannani doesn't seem to mind what I look like. He's the only male in the world who will ever feel that way. So probably I'm lucky to have found him. The trouble is, I think he's revolting. I hate his squeaky voice, and I hate that he carries a dumb briefcase everywhere. I can't stand it. And he wears a SeaWorld t-shirt. But I have to figure out how to adjust to those things if I'm going to marry him, because I certainly don't want to have a brief and unfortunate marriage for Pete's sake. Louis! Whoa, you're going much too fast for me, Anastasia. Wait a minute. Her mother sipped at the beer and looked puzzled. First of all, what makes you so sure that you want to get married at all? Lots of women never do and are perfectly happy. Would you be? No, I like being married, but that doesn't mean that you have to. Anastasia sucked on her popsicle and thought for a long time. She thought about the time that her mother had had the flu and her father had taken cups of tea to her and sat beside her, not minding that he might catch the flu too. Then she thought about what it would be like to be in bed with the flu if there were no one to bring cups of tea and sit beside your bed. It made her feel lonely just thinking about it. Then she thought about the day that Sam was born, and her father took her mother to the hospital and stayed there with her while Sam was being born. And when he came home, he was so excited that he couldn't remember if the baby weighed 8 pounds and 4 ounces or 4 pounds and 8 ounces. And she and her father smoked cigars to celebrate. Only hers was a chocolate cigar. She thought about what it would be like to have a baby if you weren't married, and nobody stayed with you while the baby was being born and smoked a cigar after to celebrate. It made her feel lonely. She thought about never having a baby at all. That made her feel even lonelier. I really do want to get married someday, she said finally. Okay, said her mother. First of all then, about Robert. I've never met him, but I'll take your word for it that some things about him now are revolting, are gross. But he's how old? 12? Yeah. Well, I didn't know your dad when he was 12, but I'll bet you anything he had a squeaky voice. Robert's voice will change. He'll grow taller. And I can guarantee you that within the next year, his mother will be using the SeaWorld t-shirt as a cleaning cloth rag. Do you know what I was using as a cleaning rag just this very morning? What? A pink t-shirt with ruffles on the neck and daisies, flowers on the sleeves. Oh, gross. I had forgotten that shirt. Well, you loved it when you were 8 or 9. People's tastes change. Robert's will too. Yeah, probably. He won't even like me after a while. Anastasia caught the last piece of green popsicle just before it slid off the stick. She fired the empty stick into the wastebasket with a long, arching basketball shot. Her mother laughed. Well, maybe not, but other boys will. Ha, said Anastasia gloomily. Ha? Trust me, I promise you that will be true. Did you just hear something? I thought I heard the buzzer. The doorbell. It's the first time anyone has rung the doorbell since we moved in. I'll get it. The boy at the front door was the same boy that Anastasia had seen mowing a lawn down the street. She had walked past him twice, trying to get up the nerve to say hi. Now he was standing right on the front porch, looking at her. He was looking down at her because he was a little taller than she, and he was wearing cut-off jeans and a rugby shirt. Rugby is a sport. He looked a little like Luke Skywalker. When he said hi, she noticed his voice was a little squeaky like Robert's. His voice will change, she thought happily. Hi, she said. My name's Steve Harvey. I live down the street, and I saw that you guys moved in, and I wondered if you wanted your lawn mowed, like the grass cut. I've got a lawnmower right outside. Well, I'll ask my mother, but I'm absolutely certain she'll say yes. She was just saying this morning that the grass needed to be cut. What she had said actually at breakfast was, Myron, we have to buy a lawnmower and cut this grass. My name is Anastasia Krupnik, she added before she went to get her mother. What grade are you in? I'll be in 7th. Me too. You'll probably be in my homeroom because they do it alphabetically. Oh, well, it'll be nice to know someone in my homeroom before I start school. Yeah, it's lousy. It sucks to be the new kid. I know, because I just moved here last year. But it doesn't take long to make friends. Do you play tennis? Nah, not very well. Me neither, but there are courts down behind the school. You want to play later? Sure. Wait here a minute, and I'll go ask my mom about the lawn. Her mother was standing in the kitchen, grinning, smiling. Mom, there's a boy who... I know, I was eavesdropping, which means listening in on the conversation. We do need the grass cut. You were just saying this to Dad this morning. Anastasia, up in my bathroom there's a brand new bottle of shampoo. You'll have time to wash your hair and dry it while he's doing the lawn. Do you think maybe I should shave my legs? Whispered Anastasia. The last time you tried to shave your legs, her mother whispered back, you practically needed blood transfusions. I would forget it if I were you. Cosmopolitan magazine says that it's fashionable not to, especially if you have blonde hair like me. Fine, wonderful. Now scoot. I'll get him started on the lawn. Thought Anastasia as her hair dried, and she practiced her backhand, so playing tennis, standing in the center of her tower bedroom. Maybe it's true, what Mom said. Maybe other boys besides Robert Giannani will like me. Maybe this boy will. Maybe my hair will look okay when I go to play tennis. Maybe my legs aren't quite as skinny as they were last month. Maybe I will think of something intelligent to say to him, and maybe I won't hit the ball into the net every time, the way I usually do. I think I will have a hyphenated name, she thought, when I get married. Anastasia Krupnik Harvey, she thought. That doesn't sound too bad. Anastasia peeled a strip of the old, loosened flower wallpaper from the wall of her room, exposing and showing an even older layer of paper underneath on the wall. She rolled the strip into a ball and shot it into the wastebasket, into the trash can. Outside, she could hear the clatter of Steve Harvey's lawnmower. Maybe I will get to feeling at home in this room before too long, she thought. Maybe the suburbs aren't as bad as I used to think. Maybe I was making premature assumptions. Anastasia picked up her notebook and began a new version of Chapter 2. After she moved to her new home, Anastasia wrote, the young girl began to be more adaptable than she had been in the past. She began to take up tennis as a hobby. So that's the end of Chapter 8. Basically, she goes over to her neighbor's house, Mrs. Stein, and gives her the fish, learns about her past when she got married. She goes to talk to her mom about Robert Giannani, and then suddenly the boy that she saw the other day wants to cut the grass, and now she's imagining her life with him.